Hello everybody, welcome to this live stream by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in this live stream, and by the way, let me know if you can hear me all right out there. I'm not sure, I'm testing out sort of a new microphone system here, so let me know if you guys can hear me. But today we're going to be editing a couple photos. These are just photos I took, throughout the week and over the weekend. I mean, it's only 2 photos, but these are just photos that I liked, and I was going to edit them in GIMP today, and I figured, why not do a live stream of the edit? Of course, before we get into that, I'm going to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check those out. You can also support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And you can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And I'll include a discount link to this in the description, as well as all the relevant links from today's tutorial in the video description. So guys, feel free to ask any questions you might have throughout this tutorial, either about this tutorial or about really anything that you've seen in our tutorials up to date, including tutorials that were released this week or just past tutorials that maybe you watched today or maybe that you watched earlier in the week. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open up my first image here. And so here are my images I'm going to be using today. The first one is in the thumbnail for any of you guys who were waiting on the live stream. And the second image here is just another image I took with my camera. Both of these I took with the Canon 7D, and I took them with a Tokina lens, 11-16 f2.8. So it's a pretty wide angle lens here. And so here's the first picture, unedited of course. And here is the second picture. These are both taken in Denver, near downtown Denver. So it's a really cool area and a lot of cool photo opportunities here. So I'll start by right-clicking on this first image, and I will go to Open With, and I'll choose GNU Image Manipulation Program. And that is going to open this image up. Both of these are fairly large images, so they might take a few seconds for them to open up here. And I also have this set to open these images up into 32-bit images by default, 32-bit floating point. So there's a little bit more data in here that's just going to improve the precision of our image while we edit, but it's also going to cause us to take a little bit longer to load. So as we're waiting for GIMP to load, again, feel free to ask any questions you might have about any tutorial you've watched either this week or in the past that maybe you didn't have answered. I do try to get to all my comments on my channel. But this is going to ask me here if I want to convert the current color profile here to the built-in sRGB color profile. So I'll just hit convert on that. And that'll convert this image to the native sRGB. I always recommend doing that. The GIMP team recommends doing that. All right, so here is our image. You'll notice it's a pretty large image here. It's also set to 32-bit linear floating point. And I did go over in my black and white tutorial how I created this as my default setting when I'm uploading images. So here's our image, and I really like this image. It's of a pedestrian bridge that's going over the Platte River into the downtown area in Denver. And some first thoughts about this image is that there is some pretty cool lighting from the sun here. This was during sunrise, but I think the lower half of the photo here is pretty dark, so it's in the shadows, and so there's not a whole lot of detail going on there. So that's something we're going to fix, and we're just going to try to bring out some of the details here overall and also maybe enhance or improve the color of this photo. But what I'm going to do first, just to make this a little bit more manageable, because this is a 5,000 pixel image here, I'm just going to scale this down. So I'll just go to Image, Scale Image, and I'm just going to go with 1920, hit the Tab key, That'll automatically update that using the current aspect ratio of this image. And I'll keep the resolution set to 72 because I'm not going to be printing this or anything. And then interpolation here, I'm just going to keep this set to no halo and hit scale. And that will scale my image down there. Once I've done that, I'm going to just double click on this right here, or you might just be able to single click actually, and that will fit my image into my image window. And the first thing I'm going to do here is just duplicate this main image layer, and I'm just going to name this main right here. And I'm going to try out a new order of editing. I usually edit in a certain order using certain image adjustment tools, but I'm going to use a different order here. So I'm going to start by adjusting my color balance. I'm going to go to Colors, Color Balance. And for this image, there wasn't actually a whole lot that I felt like I needed to do in the color balance adjustment area. So I'm just going to really create some minor adjustments here. And again, this is a new order. I don't typically start with the color balance, just kind of testing it out, seeing how it goes. But it is a little hard to edit when you can't really see a lot of the detail here just because this is still a dark image. But I'm just going through the different ranges here, so the shadows, midtones, highlights, and just tweaking slightly the color balance of this image. And I am going to go through here at the end and just warm this image up a little bit. So I am trying to add a little bit more yellows and reds, things of that nature. This is a fall image. You know, we're in fall right now. Maybe this is considered winter at this point. I think we're still in fall for a couple weeks. So I do want to bring out those fall colors. You'll see there's like some oranges and reds in here, just various fall colors from the foliage still. And I do want to bring those out. You can't see them really yet, but we're going to get to those as we enhance this image. All right, once I've done the color balance, now what I'll do is I'll move on to the exposure. So I'm going to go to Colors, Exposure. And although I do want to bring out the detail in the darker parts of my image, I'm not going to fully do it using this exposure tool. And I also don't want to overdo it with the exposure tool because the more you bring out the details and the shadows, usually the more noise that's going to bring to your image. And we don't want to bring in too much noise, but I think it is inevitable for there to be a little bit of noise. So what I'm going to do is just increase this by a half stop here on the exposure. And if I hold Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom in on the image, especially the darker parts of the image, I'm just kind of monitoring the noise going on here. If I bring this up to, whoops, let me just delete that. If I bring this up to a full stop, and let me make sure that I get the 1 before the decimal there. So that's a full stop. And just move around the image here. I think my main issue with this, because I did edit this image before, was just that the highlights here do get a bit too bright for my taste. If you guys like that look, feel free to use it. But I'm just going to go with the half stop for now, and we will sort of brighten up other parts of the image using some other tools here. So I'll just click OK on that. All right, once I've done that, I'm going to open up my Shadows Highlights tool. So I'll go to Colors, Shadows Highlights. And so the main thing I'm going to do here is work on my shadows. So these are the shadows in here, obviously. And if I turn this up too much, it's going to create a lot of noise going on here, a lot of digital artifacts. And it's going to take a second to load here. And I'll just repeat while this loads. If you have any questions about any tutorials you've been watching over the last week or so, or just in general, feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions. Or if you just want to give a shout out, say hello, feel free to do so. And I will admit, while we're on the live stream, this is sort of an unfortunate feature of GIMP, which is that sometimes it can stall out on you. Right now, it's not responding. It'll come back in like, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds maybe. But this is a feature that I think they need to work on, just sort of improving the performance here of GIMP. If this were Photoshop, probably wouldn't stall out on you like this, even if it were a really large image. So, while this is loading, I'm just going to take a quick break, and I'll see you guys on the other side. All right, looks like this finally loaded, and hopefully some members of the GIMP team are watching, because that is something that needs to be fixed, the amount of time it took for that to load. Once this is loaded, go ahead and adjust your shadows slider here, and this is going to, you'll see, bring out some of the details here in the shadows of our image. But if I hold Control and zoom in, you don't want to, again, overdo what's going on here in the shadows. You want to bring this up too high, because as you can see, that looks really artificial and it doesn't look great at all. And I've seen this in some people's images, especially when they're editing in GIMP. They tend to sort of crank up the features all the way, and it does tend to wash out detail or bring in noise and just really kind of ruin an image. So always try to use the tools in moderation here within GIMP, and try to limit the amount of noise that's showing up in your photo. So here's a before, here's an after. So we cranked up the shadows a little bit to bring out some of the details, and again, we are going to use some other tools to help to enhance this area. And you can also adjust the highlights area of your image, and you don't want to overdo it, once again, because it will sort of blow out your highlights. And although this is a cool effect, the light coming from the buildings, we don't want to completely overdo it. So we'll find a happy medium here. And then if you shift the white point, that is going to sort of crop your whites to a certain degree, and so that's going to cause your overall image to become brighter. So there's a before, there's an after, there's a lot more detail in here, and I'm just going to click OK. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is add a luminosity mask to this, and I'm going to be using a plugin that was developed by one of our subscribers, and this was based on a luminosity mask plugin tutorial that I did a while back. But if I go to Filters, Generic, Luminosity Mask Setup, and click on that, it's going to run this plugin, and it's going to run basically what the luminosity tutorial did, so you guys don't have to go through all these steps manually. And I do have a card on this video linking to that tutorial on my website. It's a text tutorial or a how-to article on how to install the plugin for this. So definitely check that out. I don't know if you guys can see that link right now in the card, but I'll definitely make sure once this recording is finished that that link gets put up there. Anyway, so this is run, and you'll see that now it's separated our darks from our midtones and our lights. And so each one of these layers has layer mask on it, and it's labeled based on what it's masking out and what it's keeping here. So this layer, for example, is keeping only the lightest parts of our image, and these are the less light parts of our image, and these are the even less light parts of our image. So you got light, lighter, and lightest. And I'm actually not going to use the mid-tones or the lights, so I'm just going to delete both of those. I only want to affect the dark parts of my image. If you guys wanted to adjust those lights or the midtones, feel free to do so. But I'll hold control and zoom in just a tiny bit here. And so with this darks layer, what I'm going to do is come over to colors. And it should allow me to edit those, but it's not, of course. Let me undo deleting these two layers and see if that helps. Oh, actually, you know, my mistake. So I'm going to make sure, and let me hit Control Y because I do want to redo deleting those. I'm clicked on the layer group. That's why that wasn't showing up properly. I want to click on the actual layer here. And I'll go to, again, colors. And this time I'm going to use my levels tool. And I'm going to use these levels to brighten up those shadows down here. And it might take a second for those to load up, for the changes to load up. So there you can see as I drag my midtone slider here, it's drastically improving how bright our shadows are. But if I zoom in, you'll see that there's some noise added here when I'm doing that. So there is a balance between being able to brighten this up and then also making sure that you're not adding too much noise here. And if I shift this shadows slider here to the right a little bit, you'll see it'll darken that back up, and that's not what we want to do. So here's a before and here's an after. So our midtones and our shadows have been brightened up quite a bit there, and I tried to limit the amount of noise that was added as a result of that. But I'll click OK and apply those changes. So if I shift click on our original layer here, you can see what our original photo looked like, and then I'll shift click on that again, and here you can see what our photo looks like with the changes. So if you're happy with the way this looks, you can click here to collapse the layer group and then right click and go to merge down. And that'll merge our darks layer onto the image layer that we're editing here. So now it's all back on one layer. And now that we've done that, I'm just going to come over here to colors, curves, and I'm going to use this to add a little bit of contrast here and also further adjust the shadows and the highlights of my image. And so by clicking on here, this is adding a midpoint right here, and then this point right here is helping me adjust my shadows. So usually when you decrease or increase one area of your image, such as the shadows, and you do the opposite effect to the highlights, it's going to create some contrast. So if I pull my highlights down a little bit and then pull my shadows up a little bit, it's going to add a little bit of contrast there while also helping us to brighten up the shadows. And I'm going to, again, hold Control and zoom in to make sure I'm not adding too much noise when I do that. Usually in my tutorials, I decrease the shadows and increase the highlights, but in this case, I think the shadows just need to come out a little bit more, so I'll just go ahead and do the opposite from what I usually do, and I'll just click OK. And now what I'll do, now that I've added the curves to this, is I'm going to add a little bit of saturation to this. Right now it is really desaturated, so the colors don't look great in this image. So I'm just going to go to Colors, Saturation, and I'm just going to turn the scale of this up a little bit. And once again, you don't want to overdo it. So if I go too far to the right, you'll see this is way oversaturated. This is another tendency of amateur photo editors. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit, make sure that we are keeping the saturation reasonable. But we do want to add color into this, so you'll see that a lot of the color is starting to pop out now, a lot of those fall colors I mentioned in the beginning of the tutorial. So here's a before, there's an after. And I'll click OK. All right, once I've done that, I'm going to adjust the temperature of this. So I want to, again, enhance the fall look of this, but I also want to enhance the fact that this was taken in the morning. So morning light is always like that gold color. That's why they call it the golden hour. And so I want to bring out those golden colors in this image. So I'm just going to go to Colors, Color Temperature, and I'm just going to turn up my intended temperature here, and you'll see that'll give this sort of a gold color. And if I go too far to the right, it just gives it too much of a yellow color. But if I come over here, and we can always preview this, so before, after, maybe tone it down a little bit. before, after. So it just warms the image up a little bit and it makes it look more true to the original colors. Whereas before it was more of a cold, almost like midday look. And so this is what we want, this sort of more golden color. So I'll click OK. And lastly, what I'm going to do is add a vignette to this. So I'm just going to come over here and create a new layer. And I've already got my layer name set to vignette. And then I'm just going to click OK. And then I'll go to Filters, Light and Shadow, and choose Vignette. And this is a bit much, so I'm just going to turn the radius up a bit to get some of the really dark black parts of our vignette off of the corners there. And then I'm also going to adjust the softness so that the black doesn't impede or it doesn't come in too much into the center of my image. So just decrease the softness of that a little bit. There's a before, there's an after, and I'll click OK. All right, so let's shift click on the original image. There is the original image before we made any adjustments, and then I will again shift click, and there is after with our adjustments made there. And I didn't crop this or anything. You could technically crop it, grab the crop tool. Let me uncheck the fixed aspect ratio option, maybe crop out some of the top and bottom there, and then crop it like that. That looks pretty good. So let me redo the vignette here and go back to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette. Crank the radius up a little bit, crank the softness down, before or after, and I'll click OK. So there's my first image. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. And in a second here, I'm going to move on to our next image. Thank you for everybody who's just now joining me. Welcome. And I am conducting a live tutorial, a live photo editing session here. All right, so let's move on to my next image. So I'm going to open up my file window that has my images in here, and I'm going to right click and go to Open With and choose GIMP again. And this is going to take a second because it's converting this to 32-bit floating point. And that is something, once again, if you're just joining me, that I went over in my black and white photo editing tutorial, so definitely check that out. And you'll see how to automatically set your GIMP up to convert your images to 32-bit floating point. But now it's going to ask me if I want to convert this to the built-in sRGB, and that is what I want to do, so I'll hit Convert. So unlike my last image, this is actually an image that I have not edited yet, so I don't have a sort of pre-made version of this that I'm going to follow. I'm just going to kind of edit this on the fly, and yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy the final result here. But I am going to start off, since this is a 5,000 pixel image, by scaling this down. So I'm going to go to Image, Scale Image, and I'll change this to 1920 and hit the Tab key. I'll keep the X and Y resolution set to 72 and the interpolation set to no halo and scale. And I'm going to hold Control and zoom in a little bit. So again, this is of Union Station. This is a really cool train station in downtown Denver. And I just thought this composition was really cool, just the architecture here, and just the fact that I was using a wide-angle lens. It really captured the movement of the architecture. And then you've also got the main Union Station building here. And by the way, let me know if the volume level and everything is okay. And I see a few people are joining us now. So thanks for joining. We are doing a live photo editing session here. I'm on my second photo. Feel free to go back and watch the beginning of this if you want to start from the first photo that I edited. So now that I've imported this in here and I've scaled it, next thing I'm going to do again is go to the color balance. So colors, color balance, and I'm just going to adjust this. So this was another image that I took. I actually took this image this morning. And so I don't want this to be more blues because that just gives it a cold sort of look. So I'm just going to add some yellows to this to try to capture that morning glow that was here when I took this photo. And I don't want to add too many greens to this because it doesn't really gel with the photo. And let's see, so there's some reds. Let's see what it looks like with the cyan. So I'll add a little bit of red in here, not too much. And these are the midtones, so now I'm going to switch over to my shadows. And again, I'm going to just play around with the sliders here, see what looks best. So maybe add a little magenta here, not too much. There's some blue. And so I like it a little bit more with the yellows. Here's a before, here's an after, so very subtle changes. I'll switch over to my highlights now. And once again, I'm going to play around with the color settings. I don't want to add too much because we have other tools that we're going to use that are going to, adjust the colors. Like the color temperature would be the main one that we're going to be using. So I don't want to overdo it within this one tool. So I'm just going to keep the greens and magentas there. And I actually like a little bit of cyans in the highlights for this photo. So there's a before and there's an after. So I'll click OK. Next, I'll test out the exposure and see if there's anything we need to adjust here. I do like the original exposure of this image, but I'll see if brightening this up a little bit improves it at all. So I'll just add a half stop. That actually looks pretty good. Let's go full stop and see what that does. So I'll just type a 1 there. That's a bit much for me. And so I'm just going to stick with the half stop. And as always, we'll preview that. And of course, you can always do a split preview. So on the left side is the after, on the right side is the before. I'll click OK. All right, so now we're going to adjust the shadows and highlights. And I think for this one, it's not going to be as drastic because the shadows aren't as dark as our last image here. So I'll just go to colors, shadows, highlights. Hopefully we don't freeze this time. And there we go. So I'm just going to increase the shadows a little bit. Again, if I go too far to the right, it's going to look really artificial. So I'm just going to play around with the slider until I get the amount of detail I want. So I'll go with about 60 there. You can also adjust the highlights and see if that improves the image. It's obviously way too much. If I turn it down, it's going to tone down some of the highlights. So I don't necessarily need to adjust the highlights here, I think. So I'm going to leave that pretty much the same. And then you can always adjust the white point. So that's just going to clip those whites and just increase the number of whites in the image, or at least change the number of white pixels in the image. So I'll just go with that and click OK. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I'm going to skip the luminosity mask portion of this image because I don't think there's enough going on in any one part of the image, the lights or the darks, that need to be isolated and edited separately like in our last image. So I'm going to skip that part for this one. So next I'm going to go to the curves. So I'm going to go to colors, curves, and see if I can add a little bit of contrast to this. So I'll just decrease the shadows a tiny bit. I know we increased them in the shadows highlights tool. I'm just going to decrease them a little bit just to add some contrast here. So there you can see our final result. I'll click OK. Next, I'm going to use my saturation tool to bring out some of the colors here. So I'll go to colors, saturation, and I'm going to just bring up the saturation a little bit here. So you can see as I do this, it's really bringing out those original colors, and that's way too much, so I'm going to turn that down a bit. I don't want to overdo this as always. There's a before, there's an after. Let's try a little bit more. So I really like the contrast of the blue sky and then this, I know it's not really orange, it's actually white, but it looks almost orange because of the way the sun's hitting it. So it gives it that nice contrast between the orangish white and the blue. So I'll click OK. And now I'm going to see if adjusting the temperature is going to make this look any better. So I'll go to colors, color temperature, and I usually keep the original temperature the same, and then I just play around with the intended temperature. So if we do want to make this look more like the morning light, we can increase the temperature, and you'll see that'll just really bring out some of the yellows and the more gold colors in this photo. And we can always do a preview of before and after. And I always just drag my sliders around to see what this is going to look like if I add more or less of this effect. So I like this right here. And I'll just click OK. And actually, one thing I forgot to do on my last photo, which I'm going to do right now for this photo, is I'm going to add some sharpening to this. So I'm going to go to Filters, Enhance, and I'll do Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And I usually just keep the settings the same for this, but you can always hold Control and zoom in and find a point on your image that you want to reference. Maybe it's the Union Station sign. And you could play around with the settings here and see if you need to, add or remove any amount or radius to this. So you'll see the radius kind of adds more contrast here, and it's a little bit more noticeable. And then you can see it before and after. You can hold Control and zoom out a bit to make sure that you're not adding too much sharpening to this. That is a little bit too much, so I'm going to turn it down, probably back to around the original there, and I'll click OK. And now what I'll do is I'll create a new layer, and I'll keep this name Vignette, and I'll keep all the settings the same there. And of course, I'll go to Filters, Light and Shadow. I don't know if this photo is going to need a vignette just because the way the architecture is framing this image almost creates like a natural sort of vignette, but I'm going to test it out anyway. So again, I'm just going to adjust the radius, turn the softness down a little bit. I actually don't mind the vignette on here. It does kind of help to bring it all together. And I'll click OK. So there's our second image. Let me come back to this one and just add a little bit of sharpening to it. So Tools, Filters, Enhance, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And before, after, so a little bit sharper there, and I'll click OK. So now I'm going to export both of these. So I'll go to File, Export As, and I'll just name this Bridge Photo. And I'll save this under my live stream photos. And I do want this as a JPEG, so I'll hit Export. I'll turn the quality all the way up on this. Unless you're adding this to a website or something, you could turn the quality down to like 70. But I'll just go with, actually I will go with 70 on this because I might upload this somewhere. I'll hit Export. And then I'll come over here to this image, do the same thing. So File, Export As. I'll go Union Station, Architecture. Hopefully I spelled architecture right. I think I did. And I'll hit Export. I'll keep the quality at 70 for this one as well. And hit Export again. And there we go. All right, guys, so that's it for this live stream. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can help support us on Patreon and help our channel grow. And you can also enroll in our GIMP best-selling photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And I'll include all those links in the description. I think most of them are already there right now. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.